Hello, and welcome to another edition of FNR Ask the Expert. So today we're going to talk about enjoying Indiana herps. Now, if you don't know what herps are, don't be scared. We will tell you all about it, how you can get involved in this fun hobby, what you need to know, how you get started, what equipment you need, what herps are. All of those things we're going to cover today. So don't be scared. We're joined today by FNR's own Professor of Wildlife Science, Dr. Rod Williams, along with Mike Lodato, who is member of the Indiana Technical Advisory Committee for Herpetology, and also Nate Engbrecht, who is a herpetologist for the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. Like I said, they're going to share about all things herps. So that's salamanders, turtles, snakes, all kinds of fun animals. And if you haven't been watching our previous Ask the Experts, you can learn all about the specific species that you might see, and we're going to talk a little bit about those today. We're also going to share do's and don'ts, so how you do it properly as not to harm any of the environment or the wildlife that you see. And also some cool citizen science projects that you can get involved in that can help all of these guys with their research. And if you have any burning questions, feel free to put those in the Facebook chat and we'll get to them throughout the broadcast. So first of all, Rod, what is herping? And with that, I will hand it off to you and off and running.
All right, thanks, Wendy. You know, I can't tell you how many times somebody will say, so Rod, what do you plan on doing this weekend? I said, well, I think I might Friday night go out and go herping. And immediately I get a blank stare and they go, you're going to go do what now? I said, I'm going to go out and visit a local pond and do some herping. And herping in its basic form is going out in nature with a specific intent of finding and locating our amphibians and reptiles. That's really all herping is going out and finding our native amphibians and reptiles. So what I like about herping is it can be as simple as walking around your yard, looking in the trees for that gray tree frog that may be calling, and they just started calling here in northern Indiana. Or it could be a little more intentional where you have to drive 5 or 10 minutes to a local wetland or a prairie and search for snakes or turtles. Or it could be very intentional and you may drive 2 or 3 hours or maybe go to another state with a specific purpose of finding one species of amphibian or reptile that you're just dying to get your binoculars on or to see through a spotting scope. So it can be as easy as you want, or it can be something that you have to really plan for and visit. And the good news is there's lots of places right here in the Hoosier state that you can visit and see up to 90 different species of amphibians and reptiles in the state. And with that, that's one of the major things that we're going to focus on today is where can you go? And if you go to certain places in the state, what can you expect to see? Because some of our species are endemic to certain areas or have restricted geographic distributions. And that's the only place in the state you might be able to go and see these species. So that's one of the things we're going to highlight in part of today's program as well. So with that, Wendy, I'll turn it back over to you. But now you know what herping is.
It is not creepy. Well, it might be. It's nighttime and dark and sometimes wet. So it might be, but it depends on who you're with. So with that said, we're going to go with a little bit of a walk through the state of Indiana and what you might see where. So we'll start with you, Mike. Fill us in a little bit about herping in southwestern Indiana, and then Nate will go on to you and so forth. And we're going to cover the whole state for you. Nate, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, we'll give you guys a look at some of the species and where they're located and what you might find there. Mike, you're muted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep. Okay,
good. Well, the southwest part of the state probably has the greatest diversity of amphibians and reptiles in the state. It's an area of intensive agriculture, but there's some interesting places. You got big rivers like the Wabash and the White River and Patoka and the Ohio River. And believe it or not, we have a lot of sand prairies and dunes that bring some interesting things from the west into this part of the state too. So things like Nate has a picture here of a copper-bellied water snake. If we were to go down through some back roads and along the lower Wabash River, we're going to encounter some bayous and sloughs and swamps and oxbow lakes. And this is one of the snakes we would likely encounter with not too much effort. It's a listed species in Indiana. But in particular areas, it can be reasonably common. So that's a good herp to find in Southwest Indiana. This is the lesser siren. It's very secretive, thoroughly aquatic, lives in the water continuously all the time. And it's very difficult to locate without a dip net or maybe a little bit of trapping, but it can be dip netted out in the spring, March, and early April. And it's a typical lowland species. You see the gills in the right-hand picture there. It's, again, thoroughly aquatic. And here's an interesting one. This is a green tree frog. It's one of the newer residents in the state. First appeared in the early 2000s and is known probably from 6 to 8 counties now. And we're looking for it to expand its range in Indiana. So far it's all along the river counties, the river border counties, but expect it to move northward. And it has a very distinctive call. And it's easily located. The call is easy to learn. And once you hear it and know that the frog is, the colonies of the frog are relatively easy to locate. So that's an interesting critter. Otherwise in the southeast, go ahead. I was just going to comment.
Go ahead, Mike.
Well, a lot of turtles. We have a great variety of turtles in the southwest corner. I like looking in the Wabash River itself when the river is down, the sandbars, it's a good chance to see the 2 soft shells. And if you're lucky, you can see all 3 map turtles, the common map turtle, the Ouachita map turtle, and the false map turtle, among others. And lots of sliders and painted turtles and things like that in the sloughs and in the bayous. Okay.
All right, I'll take it with the Southeast Indiana region. We've got some interesting critters down here in the Southeast. One of the ones we've been focusing on with some of our surveys here at DNR is a streamside salamander. That species has a very small range in Indiana, just mostly in the southeast quadrant of the state, some of those Ohio River border counties. And you can see the image on the right there of the eggs. They'll actually lay their eggs beneath rocks. And so if you go out into some of these small, really small rocky streams, some of them are so small you can actually jump across them. And these salamanders move into those streams in the winter and early spring and then lay their eggs on the rocks like that. So they're fairly plump, large salamander, maybe 6 to 7 inches long. And oftentimes in the spring, you'll find mostly just the eggs because the adults have hiked back into the woods there. Some of the areas that we find these to be down around Splinter Ridge Fish and Wildlife area. And so that's pretty far down in the southeast corner of the state near Madison. Another attractive, popular kind of species of salamanders, spotted salamanders. These actually occur statewide, but you would be able to find them in some of the wooded areas in south central and southeast Indiana. They have a rather large egg mass that they'll lay, usually around late February or March. You can get those. There you can see on the right. They look similar to tiger salamanders, but they have those nice, beautiful yellow spots, typically in 2 rows down the back. So mostly a forested species for that one. And then I had to include a snake in there. Ringneck snakes are pretty unassuming, quaint, and cute little snakes, really not much larger than a number 2 pencil, to be honest. But they have that beautiful kind of orange, yellow belly there on the bottom, and then kind of more of a slate gray on top. Of course, that namesake kind of yellowish ring around the neck there is a really good way to identify these snakes. These occur throughout much of Indiana. They're less common up north, but another species you might find in some wooded areas, maybe beneath some rocks. I found this one actually beneath a rock just outside of Bloomington, right along a little stream there. So a nice, unassuming little snake. And I didn't include any photos of it, but down in the southeast part of the state, that's a region where you can get into dusky salamanders. That's probably the region they're most known from in Indiana. And those guys tend to hang out a lot near springs, especially maybe cave outflows or rocky streams. They're quick. They're quick little buggers when you flip a rock and find them underneath there. But that's definitely a species that would be more connected to the southeast region of the state here. And I think our next region, Rod was going to cover the Northwest.
So I'm actually was born and raised in the southeast portion of the state that Nate just talked about. And growing up in southeast Indiana along the Ohio River, just on the border across the river from Louisville, Kentucky, and moving to Northwest Indiana, moving here to Tippecanoe County, where Purdue is home to Purdue. It's sort of known as the Great Corn and Soybean Desert. So it's very flat, right? We don't have the topographic relief that we have in southern Indiana because of the Ohio River. So it was a bit of a culture shock for me. Somebody who really appreciates amphibians and reptiles, I had to sort of rethink where I was going to look and how I was going to look for amphibians and reptiles up here. But there is more than corn and soybeans in Northwest Indiana, and we have some really cool herp species. So one of the first if you think about Northwest Indiana, a large portion is really that remnant prairie that Indiana used to have hundreds of years ago. And along with that, some of the Land Trust or the Nature Conservancy has been restoring a lot of that historical prairie to its former state. We have Willow Slough Fish and Wildlife areas. We have some really large pieces of property that are restoring those prairies. And with those restorations comes an increase in some of the species that are oftentimes associated with those prairie regions. And this is one of my favorite lizard species. Indiana is not home to a great diversity of lizards, about 6 species. And this, in my opinion, is one of the coolest species because it's the slender glass lizard. And you can see from the picture on the right, one of the most notable features of this lizard is that it's legless, right? So this is a legless lizard, oftentimes confused with a snake, right? Or other legless types of reptiles. But if you look closely, especially at the picture on the left, you can see that they have movable eyelids. They can open and close their eyes with eyelids. Snakes have a fixed eyelid. That's not possible. And this is a lizard, which means it also has an external ear opening, which snakes don't have. You can't really see it well on this picture. But the slender glass lizard's really found up in Benton County and even northward into some of the Northwest counties. But it's a really cool species, oftentimes affiliated with the edges of prairies and wet areas. And a really cool species, a 6-line race runner. We actually have some of those in small numbers here in Indiana, oftentimes affiliated with sandy areas, which we certainly have up in Northwest Indiana. And as the name would imply with a race runner, you can see the individual on the left on a rock is basking. What he's doing is warming his body up so that he can be a supercharger, right? Once they get their body temperatures elevated and they're warm, they are incredibly fast. In fact, they're active foragers, and so they will sprint from area to area, eating things like insects and sometimes flying insects, which are notoriously fast moving. So the race runners have to be as active foragers, just as equally as fast or faster, so that they can catch those prey. But they're a really cool species. 6-line race runners are really easy to identify. Those stripes, those racing stripes that run down the sides, which again are perfect for this particular species. Again, in my mind, they're turbocharged or supercharged racers on these prairie sandy soils that are out catching insects. And lastly, again, one of our snakes. This is one of our larger snakes in Indiana, which is a bull snake. Again, you can see this is a great picture. You can see the habitat on the right, this really sandy prairie type of habitat, and the photo on the left as well. I really like this snake. This is one of those snakes that oftentimes, if you see it, one of its bluffing mechanisms is a really, really loud hiss. I mean, we're talking hissing. And if I had hair, it would stand up on its end because it's alarming when it happens, right? But this is a really cool species. It's really easy to identify. It's got this really dark area on its head and its tail, and it's really tan in the center. And again, it's one of our larger snakes, approaching 5 or 6 feet in length. And again, found primarily here in the northwest part of the state. So again, if you're from that area, I would encourage you to visit the Nature Conservancy areas as well as Willow Slough. Check in, follow the guidelines at those particular properties, and then get out and walk those areas and try to find some of these species and appreciate them in their natural habitat, because it's a pretty unique system up in the northwest part of the state with some unique species, 3 of which we just talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out, Rod, because it truly is a distinct part of the state with that unique prairie fauna that's up in there that you just don't find in most other parts of the state. And as I've been sitting here thinking about these different regions, they really are kind of characterized by different things, you know, with the sand prairie up there. And you mentioned with Mike, what he talked about in the southwest, there's a lot of good bottomland swamp, even in places around Goose Pond, which is not super far southwest, but Goose Pond is a great wetland area. And then as you go into the southeast, it's kind of a mix of the forested hills, and there's some agriculture. And as we shift into the northeast here, you actually get into a little bit more of the lake country, some of these natural glacial lakes that are in that part of the state, and probably increased amounts of smaller kind of wetlands, not the giant river bottom swamps, maybe smaller wetlands that are interspersed with the agriculture. This is the region that's closer to where I grew up. A few species you might get up in that part of the state would be a northern leopard frog. These guys are fairly common actually now. They were listed as a species of special concern because of some historic declines, but they seem to be doing a little bit better these days and colonizing some of the wetlands up there. And they're, pretty characteristically green. Typically, they'll be brown sometimes with those distinct spots on the body. And they would be breeding this time of year. You could go out and hear them calling at night. They'll be picking up here as we move through April with that kind of snore type of call. Eastern musk turtle is another one you could get up in that region of the state. You'll get those sometimes in ponds and lakes. They're a fairly small turtle. Actually, they've got a little bit of a domed but sort of oblong shell. Some people might confuse them with a snapping turtle because they do have kind of a big head, and when they open that mouth up to nip you, they do kind of look a little bit like that, but the shell is very different than the snapping turtles. And so those guys you might find, like I said, in some of the lakes, some of the shallows. They don't bask a lot, but you can occasionally get them out in the open. Another snake that you could get up there that is actually fairly common across Indiana is a Decay's brown snake. These are pretty small. This is one of our smaller ones. Yeah, like I said, probably no more thicker than, a little thicker than a pencil, maybe no more thicker than your pinky, 12 to 16 inches long. They're kind of variable, but they tend to range from brown to gray. And these are ones that show up in people's yards. They can hang around your garden. There's actually some benefits to having snakes in your yard, if you can imagine that. But these guys are known to eat slugs, and so they may be a little bit beneficial to the garden area there. And so if you can tolerate a snake, that'd be a good one to have around. And there's some other really interesting species I didn't have photos of on here, but up in that northern part of the state, you can get into some rare turtles like spotted turtles and Blanding's turtles that you'll get in some of those northern marshes and some of the lake areas up there. Those are both endangered species. And so if you ever do see, I should have included a photo. If you ever do see a spotted or Blanding's turtle, we're definitely interested. We try to catalog those records and we add those to the heritage database. So I think I need to stop sharing my screen here as we kind of move to the next phase. We back online here?
We are. Just want to open the floor. Does anyone else have any species they want to talk about that didn't get mentioned in a very various area of the state? I just want to make sure we don't leave anybody's favorites out as we move on.
I guess one quick thing I might add, a species that we find sort of where southwest meets southeast in that hill country would be the timber rattlesnake. That is one that people could encounter down in that hill country in more the south central part of the state. And that is one of our larger snakes. We didn't include a photo of it, but those sometimes are found kind of just slithering around like Brown County State Park and some of those areas down there. So that's a region where you can kind of get into those and copperheads. So it's good to be mindful of that when you're out and about.
So I just wanted to remind the folks that are watching live, if you have questions about where certain species may be located, don't forget to drop those into the chat, and Wendy will send those to us live, and we'll try to get to those right away. The other thing that I will point out is Wendy has been putting some of the resources that might be available to help you go out and enhance your herping experience. So make sure you look in the chat for those resources and how you might obtain those as well.
I'm just stealing my thunder. Thanks, buddy. Anyway, so now that we know what herps are, which it can be anything from snakes and turtles to frogs, toads, and Rod's favorite, salamanders. I'm very shocked he said the word lizards though, but we'll talk about that later. Anyway, now we want to get into the do's and don'ts of herping. Like we heard Nate say a few times, flipping over rocks and things like that. But there is a way to do those things safely so that we're not injuring the animals, making sure that we're putting stuff back so that, someone doesn't come back to their house and it's destroyed. So I'm going to let Mike start with the do's when it comes to herping. And he's got many, many years of experience, so he can tell us from some of the failures he's had and also some of the great pointers he has to offer us. So Mike, why don't you get us started with some of the do's when it comes to herping?
Well, Wendy, I think it's important to keep in mind certain things when you're in the field, when some field ethics, so to speak. Oftentimes you're on public property, but sometimes you want to visit a private piece of land, and it's good to seek permission from the landowners. And it goes a long way. In my experience, most landowners are willing to have you take a look around and are interested in what you're doing. So it's good to ask for permission and get that permission before you go on private land. It's important. If you're going to be visiting state properties or federal properties, it's good to know what the rules and regulations are. They may have restrictions on hours or places that can be visited and that sort of thing. So you want to observe those rules and regulations. And oftentimes it's good to check in with the office Sometimes they maintain a herp list, a list of amphibians and reptiles that have been encountered at a property. So it gives you a leg up on what you're going to be looking for. Maybe talk to some people there and find out what's going on. When you find herps, it's best to leave them where they are, maybe take a picture or whatever, but you don't want to disturb them unnecessarily. So that's something you want to keep in mind. It's a good field ethic. I think Wendy mentioned this, but you want to restore if you're turning over logs or stones or other debris or any kind of cover. And of course, many of these animals are pretty secretive and they're often found under cover. You want to make some effort to put that back. You don't want to look like a bulldozer went through there and tore the place up. So have some good field ethic about restoring the kinds of things that you turn over, kind of put them back in their place. I guess you have to be discreet too. You have to keep in mind that there is an illegal trade in amphibians and reptiles from all over the country, including Indiana. And there are people who will take amphibians and reptiles from our state or anywhere else and try to sell them locally or internationally or whatever. So you got to keep that in mind. So be discreet about how much information you share when you find an interesting place with maybe some a diverse assemblage of herps. You can't be too careful. There are some unscrupulous people who will take animals for profit and have no interest in their conservation at all. So I also suggest if you get interested in this field at all, you keep a life list. You take notes when you're in the field and kind of keep a checklist of things that you've seen, animals that you've seen, herps that you've seen. Makes it a lot more interesting. Taking photographs is a great way to sort of capture your herps. That's what I started doing many, many years ago. And it's rewarding and it's a good way to catch, so to speak, quote unquote, what you're looking at, what you find in the field. And learn as much as you can. I think Rod and Nate mentioned this, but so many of our herps have peculiar types of habitat that they live in, whether it's sand prairies or marshes or fens, oxbow lakes, whatever the case may be. Learn as much as you can about the kinds of habitats where these animals live. As they mentioned, many are highly restricted to certain types of habitat or soil types, so or vegetation. So learn as much as you can about that. Helps you to focus when you're going into the field on what you're looking for and helps you have more success on what you're looking for. And then I think Rod mentioned this too, but I live in Evansville on this suburban area on the north side, and I've encountered 19 different species of amphibians and reptiles within a half a mile of my house, mostly from walks or driving the car. So that helps a lot. Just keep track of what's in your neighborhood. You'll be surprised at what's out there. Everything from a 5-line skink running across my front porch to a gray tree frog in the backyard. So I can keep a list of them, and there are probably some more out there yet that I haven't seen yet. So that's good. I'll give one other piece of advice I think is good is I keep a real good eye on the road. If I'm going to a place or from a place, unfortunately, so many amphibians and reptiles are killed on the road, but many are left and found on the road alive. Whatever the case may be, I stop for everything. As long as it's not a major thoroughfare, if I'm in a place where I can stop and get out and look and see what was run over or what's in the road. And sometimes your first indication you have that a certain herp, amphibian reptile is found in a particular region is from a dead snake or salamander on the road. So when you're driving, it's good to take a look and see what's on the road. And if you can get off the road safely and get out and take a look, get your field guide out if you have to, or take a picture or whatever. You learn a lot that way by looking for what's on the road, whether it's alive or dead. And the dead ones, of course, are known as DORs, dead on the road. That's the term used, but they're very useful to learn what's in the area, also to learn to identify certain species. So, for what it's worth.
I just wanted to reiterate one of the points that Mike brought up, which is photographing these amphibians and reptiles. So it's great to photograph these so that you have your photographic record. But if you don't know what it is, that's a great record that you can send to Mike or Nate or me. And I get regular emails, and I know personally that Mike and Nate do too on a regular basis. Hey, Rod, what is this lizard? What is this salamander or snake? And take many photographs, right? And try to get more than just the head, try to get the body, try to get as representative of a photograph as you can, which helps us identify it for you. But I know willing, and I get a kick out of getting these emails and helping people identify the various amphibian and reptile species that they see in and around their area as well. So those photographs are really key, and Nate's probably going to touch on some other ways they're key later on, but for identification, really important, especially if you don't know what it is.
Good point.
Yeah, I agree. And, we live in an era now where almost everybody has a camera in their pocket, in the form of an iPhone or a smartphone of some kind. And so it's actually, we've got a little bit of an advantage these days with that. So I agree with that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the don'ts. Mike covered the do's, and I'm going to cover a few of the don'ts. One of the things when Mike mentioned working along roads there, it's especially this time of year, as we start to get into late April, May, and June, you'll start to encounter turtles crossing roads during that nesting season. They're moving out of the ponds and lakes onto land. If you encounter a turtle on the road, crossing the road, you can legally, if it's safe to do so for you to stop over, you can get out and move that turtle across the road. You always want to move it in the direction that it's going. You don't want to turn it around, because that turtle's going somewhere. And if you turn it around, it may turn around and come back out on the road. So help it advance its course. You can move it off the road. Just obviously be mindful of traffic. Just be really careful. And if it's a larger turtle, a snapping turtle, you certainly want to be mindful of how you handle it. I will say, don't pick, this is tempting, but don't pick up a snapping turtle by its tail. It seems like a great handle to grab onto, but the weight of that turtle can actually cause damage to the vertebrae in the tail. You can actually feel it pop, and that's not good. So yeah, try not to grab a snapping turtle by the tail. I tend to grab it at the shell right above the back legs. Is a place I found to be effective, but just know that those guys are terribly fast and they've got a really quick bite. But move those turtles in the direction they're going, and try to resist the temptation to take that turtle and just to move it like to some other site. You don't want to move amphibians and reptiles around the landscape. I know that in your mind or in your heart you may have good intentions, but if you move that turtle 2 or 3 or 4 miles down the road or to some nearby park, that turtle's in a new place and it's going to be lost, and it might actually try to go back, have that kind of a homing instinct to go back to where it came from, which is probably going to put it in more harm's way as it wanders across the landscape, get run over. Good intentions are nice, but we just want to be mindful about these kind of things and be informed. And it's also a good practice just not to move any kind of amphibian or reptile to any new place. That's actually a legal issue. You can't actually relocate amphibians and reptiles to different places in Indiana without a permit, because we have concerns not just about its survival with respect to being in a new area, but also the spread of disease. If that turtle's carrying some kind of pathogen, even if it's not actually sick, and you move it to a new area, you could potentially spread a disease. I mean, we're thinking about the spread of disease all the time with COVID right now, but we've been thinking about this for years when it comes to these herps, because we just don't want to, or any wildlife, because we don't want to artificially move a disease across the landscape. And it's probably even more important not to release any pets that you have. Maybe you have a pet turtle, maybe you bought something at a pet store. You do not want to release that into the wild, because in that case, you could be dealing with a pathogen, a disease that's not even native to North America. You could be introducing some completely foreign disease into the ecosystem. So those are some big don'ts. We want to enjoy these animals. We want to really get up close to them, but when we can, but we want to make sure that we're also doing what's best for them. Another don't, this one's probably pretty obvious, but some people need to be reminded not to handle venomous reptiles. We have 4 venomous snake species in the state, and the ones that people would probably encounter the most would be a copperhead in southern Indiana. They can inflict a nasty, painful bite and envenomate you. And if you're in the south central part of the state, like I mentioned, and even all the way down to the Ohio River, in parts of the Hoosier National Forest, you could encounter a timber rattlesnake. My experience with those 2 venomous snake species is that they're pretty chill. They tend to just sit still. You don't have to mess with them. I wonder sometimes how many I have walked by when I'm out in the woods doing field work, because I rarely see copperheads, and I know they're around and they blend in super well with the leaves, but you don't want to try to mess with those. We occasionally do have people who get bit, and I think, I don't know for a fact, but I suspect it's people who are goofing around, maybe trying to impress their friends or something like that. So just be smart, common sense. And a lot of snakes will try to bite you, even the non-venomous ones will, and that's not pleasant either. So we definitely want to try to leave those guys alone. Another thing that Mike mentioned that I think is really important, and this goes for a lot of our active field herpers, and they know this, is that if you find something rare, if you find a site that's got an endangered species, you need to be very careful about how you share that information. There are a lot of people, unscrupulous people out there, who will collect and poach these animals and sell them, like Mike said, either stateside or internationally. There's a market. There's a market for rare species out there. And so if you find something rare, if you find something endangered, we'd love to know about it. You can email anybody on here. We know how to kind of direct those data into the proper places, but just be very careful about sharing that. if you'll take a photo, great. Just try to be a little more discreet about the specific locality, because it is exciting for sure to find something rare, but you want to try to be careful because, again, we got to think about not just our own enjoyment, but also the well-being of those animals. So I think I kind of covered a lot of the don'ts that I had on my end, but if you guys had any other thoughts, by all means, throw them out there, because there's lots of things to think about in this area.
I do want to add to one thing that Mike brought up. Oftentimes our species are seeking cover, right? They're cryptic, they're secretive, so they're under different types of habitat. And if you think about, and you're rolling over an 80 or 100-pound log, and oh wow, look, there's a redback salamander, which is the size of your pinky, and you take pictures and you look at it, and then you just roll the log back, and that salamander has moved, there's a really good chance that you could squish that salamander inadvertently because you're trying to put the habitat back to its original position. So we try to minimize handling as much as we can, but if the salamander moves, you might want, or you've handled it, it's best to put the log back and put the salamander or snake or whatever was hiding under there next to the log and let it go under the log, let it go under the cover object under its own power, so that you minimize any sort of injury that you might incur inadvertently by putting the habitat back. So that's, again, only if you're handling it or if it's moved and there's the threat. Then in that case, Nate, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but in that case, handling the animal is better than not handling and then risking potential injury by putting a 100-pound object on top of it.
Yeah, certainly in that situation, the animal's well-being would be better off if it wasn't crushed, because it's a good intentions thing, right? We want to put those logs and rocks back so we can kind of keep that moist microclimate, just kind of keep it like it was. But that's great. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's an easy mistake to make,
And Nate, I put in the DNR's endangered species and threatened and rare species list in our comment section so people can see what some of those species might be that we're talking about. If you just go out and you see a tree frog, we're not saying don't tell your friends. But if you go out and see some of these other species that are on this list, those are some of them we might want to, keep hush hush and, at least where you found them or whatnot. Any questions from the audience, please put those in the comment section on Facebook. We're going to move on now and tell you how to get started herping. So we've told you where to go, what to do, what not to do, but how do you really get started? What equipment do you need? What are some of the field guides that Mike mentioned that you might need? Some apps that are kind of out there that can help you with this process. So with that, we're going to start with Rod, and he's going to tell you about some of the equipment, which rule number one, Rod, is if you have equipment, keep it clean, right?
Right, for sure. For some of the disease transmission that Nate talked about, right? If you're moving animals that have that particular pathogen from area to area, you could be a vector of spreading that particular disease. Same if you have equipment that are going from place to place, that equipment could also be infected. So be mindful of that. But again, back to what I was talking about when we kicked this program off, is one of the really attractive things about herping is you can make this as tech heavy or as tech light as you want. And I tend to be a field minimalist. I like to go in with the minimal amount of equipment possible. Some of my colleagues, some of my buddies are tech junkies. They want as much technology and bells and whistles as they can have, and that's up to them, right? So I think there are really three key things that you should invest in if you're really going to be serious about herping. And one is good footwear, right? You want a really good pair of boots that are water resistant so that you can really increase the areas that you have access to. Second is a really good headlamp, because a lot of what we do, especially if you're dealing with amphibians, is best done at night when they're most active, especially in the summer months when it gets really hot during the day. They seek shelter so that they don't dry out or desiccate. And the third thing, and Mike's going to talk more about that, is a really good field guide. And I still take a field guide with me. Don't really need it as much in Indiana, but it's really great to look at the distributions to see if it's something new in a new area. But especially if I go to Alabama or Kentucky, I always have my field guide with me because I don't frequent those areas as much as I can. So those are the three core things I would urge you to consider getting. And then you can start getting more sophisticated, taking a GPS so that you can take a GPS location. So if you find something rare or new, you can send that to Nate, and Nate can really put that in his database that he maintains, all the way up into some apps that we're going to talk about. Really great video equipment. That's probably what I take in the field with me more now than ever, is either my phone or my recorder, because I love to film wildlife. My son is a film student here at Purdue, so he and I go on all kinds of adventures and do all kinds of nature recording. So really the sky's the limit with the types of technology that you take. But those three core things are what I recommend, in addition to what Nate and Mike are going to share with you too. So those, I'm going to stop there with the core equipment and then let my colleagues talk about some of the other resources that might be beneficial to you.
So I think, Mike, we're going to toss it to you to talk about some of those field guides that Rod just mentioned. Oh, you got to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
Well, one of the best known is a Peterson field guide. Probably can't see it very well. This is the fourth edition, supposed to be the fourth edition. It's dated 2016. I think it's actually the fifth, but it has, as Rod mentioned, a distribution map to show where these amphibians and reptiles are found in the eastern United States. This is a field guide for the eastern US. And it has a good quality drawing, a color drawing, or a photograph, or both, and a nice description of the physical features, the morphology, if you will, of the animal. And that's very helpful to help you distinguish between different species or closely related species. It's very helpful. And then I think we've probably mentioned it may be on the list, the Amphibians and Reptiles of Indiana. It's probably upside down on the screen, by Sherman Minton. This is the second edition. It's about 20 years old, and there's been a lot of work done since then, a lot of additions and changes in nomenclature and things like that, and a lot of new locality records, but it's still the definitive guide for Indiana. And it's really helpful because if I can find an example, like a dot map, you can see a dot map in the lower left there. These are localities where the species has been found, a particular species in the state on a county basis. And that's really helpful because you may find something. I know of examples where somebody may contact me or someone and say they think they found a particular snake that's seems way out of range. But if they were able to look at a distribution map and see, gee whiz, this is 150 miles away from the nearest known locality, it doesn't mean it's not a good record, but it's nice to know what has been found in the past. So these range maps are very, very useful. And the descriptions of the natural history and distribution and the color photographs, things like that, are extremely helpful when you're in the field. So between these two guides, the general one for the Eastern US and then the Indiana material, extremely helpful. And I think we mentioned maybe the Delorme Atlas, which this is the 2020 edition. It's slow coming out, a lot of modifications, but 64 maps, topographic information, a lot of color coding for natural areas, fish and wildlife areas, state properties, federal properties. All the back roads are labeled, and it's really helpful to know where you are, where you're going, and where you've been. So I take it in the field all the time. This is a newer one. I've got one that's pretty well worn out too, but I've got them for Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky because I live in the southwest part of the state, but extremely useful. I couldn't get by without it. So very helpful. So those are good field guides and good pieces to have with you when you're out and about. I think I mentioned maybe I didn't, but I like Google Earth as well. A lot of times, if I'm going to a place I've maybe found I've heard about or seen on the Delorme, I want to go to Google Earth and look at it, get an aerial photograph. Or sometimes often happens when I come home, I think that was an interesting place. I want to see it from the air. I want to see an aerial photograph and see, oh, here's where I was, and there's a bigger wetland that I missed, or this is a whole area I want to go back to next time. So it's really helpful to go back and see these areas from an aerial photograph. So Google Earth, if you download that on your computer, it's extremely helpful. And you learn a lot, and it gives you an incentive to go back sometime and see a little more of some place you just came from. So it's helpful.
So if you're not one of those people who likes to carry around a lot of books, Nate has a few ideas for you. If you're that, cell phone guy who, just likes to pull up the app and see what you're looking at. So Nate, fill us in on some of those for the tech savvy people.
Yeah, there's an app out there called Herp Mapper, Herp mapper that you can get on your phone. And it's really cool. It actually gives field herpers a way, or anybody who wants to use it from the general public, a way to basically quickly catalog their record that they find something. You have to take a photograph of it, so it's helpful to have a smartphone. But you have to photograph. Let's say you just find a 6-line race runner, you're up at Kankakee Sands, you somehow managed to get within a foot of it, it hasn't taken off yet. You could photograph, or a salamander, and if you have the GPS component in your phone turned on, it will basically mark that. And it basically goes into this online database. It's a citizen science effort, basically. It's a nonprofit group that puts on a citizen science platform, and you can catalog your finds, and basically it just goes into this larger database, and then others can view what you found, but only on the county level. So it's a way for you to catalog your record, but also protects that like locality data. People can't go on there and see, oh, you know, he got a 6-line race runner at Kankakee Sands at this exact intersection. It actually protects it on the county level. I actually like it when people report stuff to HerpMapper, because I was able to get administrative access for the Indiana records, so I can see the precise locality, and that helps me kind of know what people are seeing, and it also helps me know what they're finding at certain times of the year, because there may be people out there seeing stuff come online, frogs calling that I haven't heard yet. So it really helps me just from a kind of a state management standpoint. But HerpMapper is probably the most popular one that people use, and I think it's just becoming more and more popular. All different states, you know, across the globe, really, people are using it. I know some folks have reported their findings on iNaturalist. I don't have as much experience with iNaturalist, but that's a citizen science venue that people will report that on as well. A resource that I have found to be very helpful is the Indiana Herp Atlas. That was created by some basically some Hoosier herpetologists, some young men who decided to take on this effort to build a website about Indiana's amphibians and reptiles. And I believe it's nherpatlas.org, or you could just do a Google search for Indiana Herp Atlas. And it's basically an online field guide. Has really nice photographs. It's got some maps. It's got life history and biology information. And I reference that quite a bit, actually, to just kind of look at different things, to look at some of their maps. And it's a really nice resource for the state of Indiana. I know they're in the process of wanting to continually revise that website and kind of update the maps. And so that's one I would really refer the public to, people who are interested in that, because it's just a great resource that you can access on your phone or on your computer. And I believe if you make a herpetological observation, you can also catalog it through the Indiana Herp Atlas website, and they're kind of synced in with HerpMapper. So anything you enter into HerpMapper or on their website should start to appear on those maps. So it's a really cool interactive database there for Indiana Herps.
And we mentioned the word citizen science a few times throughout this broadcast. So I want to just offer people an opportunity to know what some of those projects are. I know a lot of you have been involved in those and you promote those. So Nate, tell us some of them that are available through the Indiana DNR and some of the other related groups that we have that can be a way for people to kind of get their foot in the door and started with herping.
Well, you know, historically, we had the North American Amphibian Monitoring Program, which was it was across the U.S. and several states participated in it. And it was a way for people to go out and do these little, like, they would have specific routes that they would travel, and they would stop at listening stations and they would record what frogs they hear. Unfortunately, after about 15 years of running in Indiana, that whole program ended. I think the federal funding dried up, and whatever happened, that's no longer something that people can really participate in. There are some other ones. I believe there's Frog Watch USA is a program. I think it might be through through the Zoological Society, but Frog Watch USA is something. It's not through DNR, but that people could get involved with for doing a citizen. When we talk about citizen science, we're talking about just everyday lay people, hobbyists, naturalists, being able to go out and basically document what they find in a way that contributes to this larger knowledge base in the study of herpetology or any field. I mean, with birding, it's very popular. People are cataloging their finds into eBird if you're interested in birding. But I would say that, yeah, right now, probably HerpMapper is the best one. We don't really have any actual, like, specific citizen science programs that are going through the DNR herpetology program right now. But if you find something that is actually rare or endangered, you're welcome to email it to me. I have an email account that I oversee, herpsurveys@dnr.in.gov. Herp surveys, just straight across. If you have a rare species record, you catch something like catch a mud puppy while you're fishing, you know, you see something kind of interesting, just shoot me an email. If you see a snake and you're not sure what kind of snake it is, just shoot me an email at that address. I'll try to get back with you and let you know what I think. So I wish I had more information actually about DNR citizen science programs, but once that North American Amphibian Monitoring one ended, we actually haven't started up a formal program. I generally direct people to HerpMapper for that one.
Rod, Mike, anything you want to add on the how people can participate?
I'd like to add a little bit, kind of what Nate was talking about. I think there's some interesting projects that maybe aren't formally announced, but I think we've been looking at in recent years the gray tree frog and the Copes tree frog that are both found in Indiana. When you look at them, you can't tell them apart physically, but their voices are distinct. And generally speaking, the Copes tree frog and the southern gray tree frog is from Indianapolis south, and we have both species further north. But there's a good reason to believe that there's populations of the gray tree frog in the south, and a really competent observer who knows the calls, who can bring them up and listen either on a smartphone if he hears a distinct call or hears a call he's not sure about. That would be really interesting information, and that an informed person could be very helpful there. And the other I mentioned earlier is the green tree frog has moved into the state in the last 15 years or so, and it's expanding its range, and it's an easy call to learn, and people who are competent and recognize the call to can help really track the expansion elsewhere in the state. So those would be two interesting projects. They're not very formal, but they're interesting projects that could be very helpful.
I want to switch gears just a little bit, and the whole premise of this particular Facebook Live session is to try to provide answers to people who have questions about how to get started with herping. And one of the other things that we really haven't mentioned yet is there is a Hoosier Herpetological Society. There's a group that you can join. If you just Google Hoosier Herpetological Society, their website will come up, and you can join that. And there are like-minded herpetologists who are at all levels, some who have been herping for 40 or 50 years or more, and then others who are just starting. So you can then join a group of like-minded people, and they will expound upon much of the basic information that we provided you herein. The other thing that I would encourage you to do, and this is my poor attempt at a segue, is start attending some programs throughout the state that are focused specifically on education of amphibians and reptiles. And so, for example, here in my neck of the woods in Northwest Indiana, myself and Dr. Jason Huberman here at Purdue, we partner regularly with Niches Land Trust, and we have a program coming up on June 17th, starting around 7 p.m. and we're going to go to 10 p.m. And it's one of those, he and I are both amphibian ecologists, so we're really going to focus on some wetlands and focus on amphibians. So that's where your boots that are waterproof come in handy, your headlamp comes in handy, and bring your field guide. And we're going to take people that are interested in partnership with Niches out to some local Niches properties and show people the vast diversity that they can find in some of these really small vernal pools. And then maybe if we have time, some of these larger, more permanent pools, because there's tremendous diversity just within the types of wetlands that can be, 5 or 10 miles apart. So that's one opportunity that people can go and learn more about herps. And then again, they can then talk to the participants who are interested in herps. And then you can just extend your network that way and get into herping. So there might be others that Mike or Nate want to share, other upcoming opportunities for people to go to educational programs involving herps.
Yeah, I don't even know if I mentioned this to you guys when we were chatting ahead of time, but I'm actually giving a presentation on the amphibians and reptiles of Goose Pond on April 27th. So that's coming up here in a couple of weeks. That's at 7 o'clock in the evening. So if you're in Southwest Indiana, if you're not familiar with Goose Pond, it's a large scale and very popular and successful wetland restoration. We'll be talking there, and there's a field outing component to that. We'll go out and see if we can hear some of those frog calls that I'll hopefully talk about in the presentation. And we definitely have some DNR State Park presentations coming up that I think we're going to have actually in the Facebook live feed. There's some information. I know there's some stuff up at the Indiana Dunes. Marie Laudeman is the natural stuff there. She does some various herp activities, and Patrick Halter over at Brown County State Park informed me that their Snake Fest is coming up on the 17th of July. That's a big deal over there. I actually attended it one year, and there's the Hoosier Herp Society usually plays a part in that, and they have animals there and all kinds of information. And so that would be an exciting one if you're in the south central part of the state, or you're willing to drive. I believe it was the 17th of July was the date on that. And there's a DNR calendar actually that you can check on some of these things. But from the DNR front, there's a few things going on there.
So I would encourage people that are watching the live version or we're going to plan to watch the recorded version, if you go to the DNR website or check out the resources we've just mentioned here, and you can't attend those, reach out to your state park, reach out to the naturalists there, reach out to the county parks, reach out to some of those organizations that are near you and ask them to put on an amphibian or reptile program on their docket. And I'm sure that they know exactly who they could reach out to help deliver those programs. But if you're interested in those programs and there's not one near you, ask, and perhaps you can get one on the docket.
Yeah, and a lot of those nature centers have herps, they have snakes. I know O'Bannon Woods, Jarrett Manick down at O'Bannon Woods there on the southern end of the state has an impressive snake collection down there. So if you're down in that region, you know, that'd be one worth stopping in at. And I believe they actually have still have some hellbenders at their nature center there, 2 of them. So yep, we'll have to get into hellbenders today if we don't want to, but that's a unique thing. You're not going to find that in any other nature centers here in Indiana. So a pretty special place down there.
Nate's so cautious of using the word
all of those events that have been mentioned are in the Facebook comments. So if you didn't get your calendar out and scribble it down, you can find those there. Anything else you guys want to add about herping, or why people should get involved, or why you love it so much before we jump off here?
Man, I would just say, I just think there's so many different amphibians and reptiles in Indiana that people don't even know exist here. Really beautiful and bizarre and interesting creatures, and they're pretty cryptic. You know, you may have to go to a cave entrance to see a cave salamander, or you may have to literally go underwater to see a hellbender or something. But there's just, I think that people just don't always realize what we've got as part of our kind of herpetological legacy in the state. And there's just some really cool animals out there. I'm super fortunate to be able to work with them in this capacity.
I may add the same. We have a richly diverse herpetology in Indiana. And I think the thing I find interesting at it, and I've been in the field for more than 50 years here in this region, and is a sense of discovery. And no matter how many times you've been to a place or how many times you've been out, I always have a feeling of anxiety about what am I going to find today? What am I going to see? And this might sound funny to some people, but I even get butterflies in my stomach sometime about, I'm going to see something today. This is going to be it. And you just never know. I'll give you a quick story about over in Kentucky. Right across the river from me is, from Evansville, is Henderson County, Kentucky. And there's a large wetland complex over there that I visited off and on for the last, every year, I should say off and on. I visited every year for 45 years. And there's some interesting herps there. But a few years ago, it was a rainy night, and I happened to be on the road at night and ran across a western mud snake run over in the road. Now, I've been going to this place for 45 years, and I had no idea that mud snakes were there. But here it is, pure serendipity. There it is on the road, DOR. I was speechless. I was beside myself with excitement, the sense of discovery there. And this is a snake that's no longer found in Indiana, or hasn't been seen here for over 100 years. But it's so close. It's in a couple miles of the Indiana border. There's similar habitat further north. And get your juices flowing. Hey, that could still be here. We got to go out and redouble our efforts. It makes you want to get out, and you get excited about it. At least I do. And I think get people speak the same language. It's just that sense of discovery and anticipation. It's makes it worthwhile. So never ending excitement.
Rod, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, I just want to thank all those folks that have been watching the Ask the Expert series this entire spring, where we've covered about as much herpetology as I think most people can tolerate, except people on this call right here. I've reached out to my colleagues across the state, and Indiana is actually replete with herpetologists. We have 15 or 20 outstanding herpetologists, and 2 of the best literally are joining me on the call today. I think you would be very hard pressed to find any 2 individuals that know more about Indiana herps and their natural history than the 2 gentlemen I have on the call today. So I just want to personally thank them, all my other colleagues throughout the entire spring semester that have joined us and shared their expertise and appreciation and passion for the field of herpetology. So thank you guys, I appreciate it, and get out and get herping and let us know if you see something cool.
And just a reminder, you can watch all of these in archive. Some of you are probably watching this one in archive. So those are still on our Facebook page. You can also find them in closed caption form on our YouTube channel, Purdue FNR Extension. And just want to pimp our next Ask the Expert in 2 weeks. We'll see you. And we are talking the cicada emergence. So for those of you who are curious about the noises you may or may not be hearing outside, or some of the little critters that are starting to crawl up your trees, we have all the information you could ever want from Elizabeth Barnes from the entomology department, our own Lenny Farley, and our own Jared Brooke. And they're going to be talking about the effects on trees and wildlife and just general bug stuff. So join us at noon on April 29th, and we will see you then. Thanks, Rod, Nate, and Mike. Really interesting information today, and hopefully you get some of those emails about interesting species people are finding. So we will see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.